Why does everyone assume silence means weakness? Marcus Kane's fist hit the metal briefing table like a gunshot. The sound ricocheted through Fob Python's operations tent, sharp and final. His face, still marked with fresh cuts from 3 days ago, twisted with something that looked like rage but felt more like betrayal. "Ghost 7," he said, the words bitter in his mouth. "Whoever the hell that call sign belongs to, they abandoned us." His finger jabbed toward an empty chair at the end of the table. That chair, always empty, always waiting for someone who never showed up to briefings, never joined the team for chow, never laughed at their jokes in the rec tent. 2 kilometers out, perfect overwatch position. And nothing, no comms, no shots, no backup. We called that SOS 23 times. 8 SEAL team members stood behind Marcus, and their eyes told stories their mouths wouldn't say. 3 war-arm slings. 2 had bandaged heads wrapping their skulls like white turbans. All of them looked like they'd crawled out of hell on their hands and knees, dragging pieces of themselves they'd left behind. In the corner of the tent, almost invisible in the shadows, a small figure in desert-tan fatigues carefully cleaned a medical kit. Her movements were methodical, quiet, the kind of quiet that makes people forget you're there. Sarah Mitchell, 27 years old, looked more like a high school teacher than someone who belonged on a combat base in Afghanistan. Thin shoulders, gentle hands, eyes that stayed down, always down, like she was afraid of what people might see if she looked up. "The medic," Lieutenant Brooks sneered, his voice dripping with contempt as he glanced at her, "can barely lift a rifle, but somehow she's the one patching up real warriors." Sarah's hands paused for half a second on the bandage roll. Just half a second. Then they continued wrapping, silent and steady. But something flickered behind her eyes, something that came and went so fast it might have been a trick of the tent's harsh lighting. Marcus turned to Colonel Winters, his jaw set like concrete. "Sir, I want Ghost 7's file. I want a name, and I want them court-martialed for desertion under fire." The colonel's jaw tightened. You could see him weighing his words, measuring what he could say against what he was allowed to say. "That file is classified, top secret. I don't have clearance." "Then get someone who does." A soft sound interrupted the tension. Click, click. The distinct sound of a Barrett M107 sniper rifle being field-stripped. Everyone turned. Sarah's hands moved with surgical precision across the disassembled weapon parts. Her fingers danced through the complex mechanism like she'd done it 10,000 times. In the darkness. In her sleep. In hell itself. But nobody in that room knew that yet. Nobody knew what those hands had really done 72 hours ago. Marcus continued, his voice rising with each word like a tide you can't hold back. 0300 hours. We were pinned down in that village, Kalat, Sector 15, 15 clicks north of here. Taliban fighters everywhere, RPGs, PKM machine guns. We radioed Ghost 7's position. Nothing. Called again. Static. His voice cracked on the next words. "We lost 2 good men getting to that extraction point because our angel in the sky decided to take a coffee break." Sergeant Hayes nodded grimly. He was the team's designated marksman, the kind of guy who could put rounds through a quarter at 300 meters. "We counted at least 30 hostiles, maybe more. Fire coming from rooftops, alleyways, windows. It was a kill box and we had 0 overwatch support." Sarah set down the Barrett's bolt carrier group. Her movements were still fluid, still practiced, like a pianist's hands on familiar keys. She reached for a cleaning cloth, her face expressionless. But something lived behind that blank mask. Something that watched, listened, remembered. Lieutenant Brooks stepped closer to Marcus, feeding the fire. "And now we're supposed to trust that whoever Ghost 7 is will have our backs on the next op. How do we know they won't vanish again when things get hot?" Private Jensen shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His left arm hung in a sling. A bullet had shattered his radius bone 3 days ago. His eyes kept darting to Sarah, then away, then back again. His jaw worked like he wanted to say something. Each time he opened his mouth, he thought better of it. Colonel Winters raised his hand for silence. "Gentlemen, I understand your frustration, but without proper clearance, my hands are tied. JSOC protocols. To hell with protocols." Marcus's voice cracked like breaking glass. 3 of my brothers are in that medical tent right now because Ghost 7 failed us. I want answers, and I want them now." The tent fell silent except for the soft whir of the air circulation system fighting against the 110-degree Afghan heat. Sarah finished reassembling the Barrett. Her hands moved backward through the sequence with the same effortless precision a magician uses to make cards appear and disappear. She set the weapon down gently, stood, and moved toward the exit. "Where do you think you're going?" Brooks called after her. Sarah paused at the tent flap, her back to them. Her voice was soft when she spoke, measured, the kind of voice that disappears in a crowd. "Medical tent, sir. Specialist Rodriguez needs his dressing changed at 1400 hours." "Of course you do," Brooks laughed, harsh and cutting. "Run along, medic. Leave the real soldiers to figure out real problems." Sarah's shoulders tensed for just a moment. A micro-movement that suggested she wanted to turn around, wanted to say something, wanted to defend herself. But instead, she pushed through the tent flap and stepped into the blinding Afghan sunlight. Marcus watched her go, then slammed his palm on the table again. "That's another thing. How did a medic get assigned to a forward operating base with a SEAL team? She's got no combat experience, no field time. She flinches every time someone fires a weapon on the range." Hayes grunted agreement. "Saw her yesterday when Davis was sighting in his M4. She literally jumped when he fired. What kind of combat medic is afraid of gunfire?" What none of them saw was Sarah's hands, now outside the tent, trembling slightly before she clenched them into fists. She closed her eyes and took 3 measured breaths, the kind taught in tactical breathing exercises for high-stress situations. Box breathing. 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, hold for 4. The trembling stopped. She walked across the dusty compound toward the medical tent, past concrete barriers and sandbag bunkers that baked in the relentless sun, past the motor pool where mechanics worked on a Humvee with a blown transmission, past the chow hall where the day's heat made the air shimmer and distort like a mirage. On the wall of the operations building, she passed a framed photograph. 8 men in full tactical gear, faces painted, weapons ready. SEAL Team 5, the placard read. Operation Ghost Dancer. Below it, a list of names. 7 were clearly visible. The 8th was redacted, a black bar covering both the face and the name. Sarah's eyes lingered on that photo for 3 seconds longer than necessary. Then she kept walking, but something about the way she looked at that photograph. It wasn't the way a stranger looks at unknown faces. It was the way you look at a picture of yourself when you can barely recognize who you used to be. Inside the medical tent, Specialist Rodriguez lay on a cot, his abdomen wrapped in clean bandages. Shrapnel from an IED had torn through his right side 3 days ago, the same operation that had gone sideways for Marcus's team. "Hey, Doc," Rodriguez said with a weak smile. "Come to torture me again." Sarah returned the smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. It never did anymore. "Just need to check the wound, make sure there's no infection." As she carefully peeled back the bandages, Chaplain Rodriguez, no relation to the specialist, entered the tent. Father Michael Rodriguez was a stocky man in his 50s with kind eyes and the weathered face of someone who'd seen too many young men die, too many flag-draped coffins, too many grieving mothers. "Sarah," he said gently, "how are you holding up?" She didn't look up from her work. "I'm fine, Chaplain." "That's not what I asked." He pulled up a folding chair and sat down beside her. "I've been doing this for 26 years. I know when someone's carrying weight they don't talk about." Sarah's hands paused for just a moment on the gauze. "Wound looks clean. No signs of sepsis. You're healing well, Rodriguez." The specialist grinned. "That's because you're a miracle worker, Doc." After she finished redressing his wound and moved to the supply cabinet, the chaplain followed her. "Something about you," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "You carry yourself different sometimes, like you've seen more than a medic usually sees, like you know things you shouldn't know." Sarah's back stiffened. "We all have our stories, Chaplain." "That's true, but most medics don't have the posture of a Tier 1 operator when they think no one's watching. For 3 full seconds, Sarah stood frozen. The chaplain could see her mind working behind those careful eyes, calculating how much to say, how much to hide. "I see a lot in this job," she finally said, her voice careful. "Trauma changes people." "It does," the chaplain agreed. "But there's a difference between someone changed by what they've seen and someone hiding what they've done." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you're carrying, Sarah, you don't have to carry it alone." She turned to face him, and for just a moment the mask slipped. Her eyes held something ancient and tired, something that had seen too much darkness and couldn't quite find its way back to the light. "Some things," she said softly, "you can only carry alone." "Have you ever felt invisible, like you could disappear and no one would notice?" Sarah knew that feeling intimately. She'd built her life around it. 3 days ago, in the pre-dawn darkness of an Afghan hillside, she'd become a ghost. Not Ghost 7, that was just a call sign. She'd become something else. Something that existed in the space between protection and violence, between mercy and necessity. Mission brief had been simple. SEAL Team 5 would raid a Taliban compound in Kalat. High-value target, time-sensitive intelligence. Ghost 7 would provide overwatch from a position 2 kilometers north. Standard stuff. Sarah had arrived at her position at 0100 hours, 4 hours before the team would breach. She climbed that hillside in complete darkness, moving like smoke through the rocks and scrub brush. Her Barrett M107 weighed 28 pounds. Her pack added another 60. But she'd made that climb in under an hour, silent as a prayer. At the top, she'd found the perfect hide, a natural depression between 2 large boulders that gave her a clear line of sight to the village below. She'd set up her rifle, her spotting scope, her range cards. Then she'd settled in to wait. Waiting is what snipers do. It's 90% of the job. The other 10% happens in heartbeats. At 0500 hours, the team had moved into position. Sarah watched through her scope as Marcus led his men through the darkness, their movements coordinated and professional. She'd worked with them before, not as Ghost 7, but as their medic. They didn't know that Ghost 7 was the quiet woman who bandaged their wounds and barely spoke at meals. They didn't know that the same hands that cleaned their injuries could put a bullet through a man's eye socket at 1500 meters. The breach happened at 0530. Explosive charges blew the compound door off its hinges. Flashbangs lit up the pre-dawn darkness like small suns. The team poured in, clearing rooms with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched it all through her scope, her breathing slow and steady, her finger resting beside the trigger. Not on it. Never on it until the moment came. That's when everything went wrong. Intel had said 15 to 20 hostiles in the compound. But intelligence is called intelligence because it's supposed to be smart, and this intel wasn't smart at all. There weren't 20 hostiles in that compound. There were over 50, and they'd been waiting. The ambush erupted from every direction. Fighters poured from buildings the team had thought were empty. RPGs streaked through the darkness. Machine gun fire tore through walls like they were paper. Sarah heard Marcus's voice over the radio, calm despite the chaos. "Ghost 7, this is Viking Actual. We are compromised. Heavy contact from all sides, requesting immediate fire support." She'd pressed her radio transmit button. "Viking Actual, Ghost 7. I have eyes on your position. Stand by." But she didn't fire, not yet. Because something was wrong with the picture in her scope. The fighters attacking the team. They were moving wrong, fighting wrong. Professional soldiers move with purpose, with training. These men moved with desperation. They were firing wildly, wasting ammunition, exposing themselves. It didn't make tactical sense. Unless... Sarah shifted her scope to the buildings beyond the compound. And that's when she saw them, the real threat. A squad of highly trained fighters moving through the shadows, setting up a secondary ambush. They had PKM machine guns, RPGs, professional military gear. They were moving to cut off the team's escape route, to box them in and kill them all. The men attacking the compound weren't the main force. They were bait. "Ghost 7, where's our fire support?" Marcus's voice was strained now. "We're taking casualties here. Sarah's mind calculated angles, distances, wind speed. The secondary ambush was setting up behind a low wall 400 meters from the team's position. She could hear them in her scope, not literally, but in the way good snipers learn to read a battlefield. The way they moved. The way they communicated. The way they were about to murder 8 American soldiers. She made a decision. The kind of decision that haunts you in the dark hours before dawn. The kind you can never take back. Instead of firing at the disorganized fighters attacking the compound, she shifted her scope to the real threat, the professional killers waiting in the shadows. Her first shot broke the pre-dawn silence like the voice of God. The Barrett's report echoed across the valley, and 400 meters away the lead fighter dropped. Her second shot came 3 seconds later, another fighter down. She worked the bolt, found her next target, controlled her breathing. Third shot, fourth, fifth, each one placed with surgical precision, each one ending a life before that life could end Marcus and his men. Ghost 7, we're not seeing any fire on our position. What the hell are you shooting at? But Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't. Because if she told them what she was doing, they'd adjust their tactics. They'd move toward the threat she'd identified. And that would expose them to even more danger from the disorganized fighters in the compound. So she stayed silent and kept shooting. In the operations tent, Marcus had interpreted that silence as abandonment. He didn't know that Sarah had fired 43 rounds that morning. He didn't know that she'd killed 17 fighters before they could complete their ambush. He didn't know that the only reason his team had made it to the extraction point was because someone they'd never met had murdered their way through an entire Taliban squad to save them. All he knew was that Ghost 7 hadn't answered their calls, that the disorganized fighters in the compound had kept firing, that 2 of his men had died in that chaos. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that without Ghost 7's intervention, all 8 of them would have died in that kill box. Sarah had watched through her scope as the team finally made their extraction. She'd covered their movement, dropping 3 more fighters who tried to pursue. When the helicopter dust-off cleared the area, she'd broken down her hide, packed her gear, and climbed back down that hillside in broad daylight. Alone, silent, carrying the weight of 17 deaths and the knowledge that she'd saved 6 lives at the cost of 2 she couldn't protect. Now, 3 days later, sitting in a supply cabinet in a medical tent, she listened to Chaplain Rodriguez talk about carrying burdens. She wanted to tell him everything. She wanted to scream that she'd been there, that she'd fought for them, that every round she'd fired had been to protect men who now wanted her court-martialed. But Ghost 7 was classified, top secret. Her existence as anything other than a medic was need to know, and nobody in this tent needed to know. So instead, she just nodded and said, "I appreciate your concern, Chaplain, I really do." He studied her face for a long moment, then sighed. "The offer stands. When you're ready to talk, I'll be here." After he left, Sarah sat alone among the medical supplies. Bandages and morphine, gauze and antiseptic, the tools of healing, but her mind was somewhere else, on a hillside, behind a rifle, making decisions that would follow her into every dark night for the rest of her life. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a photo she'd never shown anyone. 8 men in tactical gear, 7 faces visible, 1 redacted. That redacted face was hers. Operation Ghost Dancer. They'd called it that because she'd moved through that mission like a shadow, like something not quite real. Ghost 7. The designation had stuck. She'd completed 23 missions after that first one. 90 confirmed kills. Not 1 friendly casualty on any operation where she'd provided overwatch. But after the last mission, a hostage rescue in Syria where she'd killed 12 fighters to save 4 American journalists, she'd asked to be reassigned. The weight was too much. The nightmares were too vivid. The faces of the dead were becoming more real than the faces of the living. Command had offered her option 3, semi-retirement with a cover assignment. She'd become a combat medic. Same deployment zone. Same access to operations. But now she saved lives with bandages instead of taking them with bullets. Except when Ghost 7 was needed. Then she became something else. Something that existed in the dark spaces of classified operations and redacted reports. Private Jensen appeared at the medical tent entrance, his good arm supporting his broken one. "Doc, got a minute?" Sarah looked up, pushing her thoughts aside. "Of course. What's wrong?" He sat down heavily on a cot, his face troubled. "I need to talk to you about something. About 3 days ago." Sarah's heart rate increased, but her face remained calm. "Your wound bothering you?" "No, it's not that." He looked at her directly, and there was something in his eyes that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Recognition. I saw you." The words hung in the air like smoke. "Saw me where?" "On the hillside, after we extracted. I looked back and I saw someone coming down from that northern position. Someone carrying a Barrett. Someone small, moving fast, trying not to be seen." He paused. "It was you, wasn't it? Your Ghost 7. For several heartbeats, Sarah didn't breathe. This was the moment everything could come apart. "Jensen." "Before you say anything," he interrupted, "I need you to know something. I didn't tell the others, I won't tell them, because I've been thinking about that morning, about what happened." He shifted his broken arm carefully. "We were taking fire from the compound. Heavy fire, chaotic, but we all made it to the extraction point, and I kept wondering, why?" "You're trained soldiers," Sarah said carefully. "You fought your way out." "No," Jensen shook his head. "That's what I thought at first. But then I started remembering details, like how that machine gun position that had us pinned down suddenly went quiet, or how that fighter with the RPG who had a clear shot at us just dropped. I counted 7 separate times when we should have died and something prevented it. Someone prevented it." He looked at her with eyes that had seen the truth. "You weren't answering our radio calls because you were too busy saving our lives." Sarah felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, but crack, like ice beginning to thaw. "I can't talk about classified operations, Jensen." "I'm not asking you to." He stood up. "I'm just saying, thank you for whatever you can't talk about, for whatever you were or weren't doing on that hillside." He moved toward the exit, then paused. "And for what it's worth, I think Marcus is wrong. I don't think Ghost 7 abandoned us. I think they were the only reason we survived." After he left, Sarah sat in the empty medical tent, her hands shaking. Not from fear, from something else. Relief, maybe, or recognition. Someone knew the truth. Someone understood that her silence hadn't been abandonment. It had been survival for all of them. Why do the people who save you rarely get thanked? That question haunted Sarah as she worked through the rest of the day, checking wounds, distributing medications, pretending to be nothing more than a combat medic. But inside, something was shifting. Jensen's words had opened a door she'd kept locked. What if they knew? What if the whole team understood what Ghost 7 had really done that morning? The answer came faster than she expected. That evening, as the Afghan sun painted the desert in shades of orange and red, Colonel Winters requested her presence in his office. Sarah walked across the compound with her heart pounding. This was it. Either Jensen had talked, or Command had decided to reveal her identity, or something had gone terribly wrong. She entered the colonel's office and found him sitting behind his desk, a thin file folder open in front of him. He gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Chief." Chief, not medic, not Mitchell. Chief, her actual rank when operating as Ghost 7. Sarah sat, her face carefully neutral. "I'm going to speak plainly," Winters said, closing the file. "Marcus Kane filed a formal complaint against Ghost 7. He's demanding a court-martial for desertion under fire. It's gone up the chain to JSOC." He paused, studying her face. "They've asked me to explain why Ghost 7 didn't respond to Viking Actual's radio calls during the Khaled operation." Sarah's mind raced through possible responses, but she stayed silent. Winters continued, "I reviewed the mission recordings, Ghost 7's gun camera, the satellite footage, the communications logs." He leaned back in his chair. "Want to know what I found?" "Sorry." Ghost 7 fired 43 rounds during that operation. 17 confirmed kills. Every single one of them was a fighter who was about to kill someone on Marcus's team. He opened the file again and turned it so Sarah could see. Satellite imagery, aerial photographs, gun camera footage showing her scope's view of the battlefield. There was a secondary ambush that Marcus's team never saw, a professional unit with PKMs and RPGs setting up to cut off their escape. Ghost 7 identified the threat and eliminated it before it could engage. Winters stood and walked to his window, looking out at the base. The two men Marcus lost, they died in the initial breach. Before Ghost 7 could engage, there was nothing anyone could have done to save them. He turned back to her. But the other 6, they're alive because someone made the hard choice to ignore their radio calls and focus on keeping them alive. Sarah's throat felt tight. "Why are you telling me this, sir?" "Because I've been ordered to brief Marcus's team tomorrow morning, to show them the classified footage and explain why Ghost 7 didn't respond to their calls." He sat back down. "The question is, do you want to be there when I do it? As yourself, I mean, not as the medic, as Ghost 7. The weight of that question settled on Sarah's shoulders like a physical thing. To reveal herself meant facing their judgment, their questions, their stares. It meant owning the kills she'd made in their name. It meant stepping out of the shadows and into the light. "I don't know if I'm ready for that, sir." "Ready or not," Winters said gently, "they deserve to know the truth, and you deserve to stop carrying this alone." He stood up. "Tomorrow morning, 0700, you're dismissed." Sarah walked back to her quarters in a daze. The Afghan night was cool, a relief after the day's heat. Overhead, stars filled the sky in ways they never did back home. She thought about tomorrow, about Marcus seeing her face instead of a redacted photograph, about standing in front of men she'd saved and admitting she was the one they'd spent 3 days hatting, about owning the violence she'd committed in their name. In her small room, she sat on her bunk and opened her footlocker. At the bottom, beneath her uniforms and personal items, was a worn leather journal. She'd been keeping it since her first kill. 90 entries, 90 names when she could learn them, 90 faces she'd seen through her scope in the moment before she ended their lives, 90 human beings who'd woken up that morning not knowing they'd never see another sunset. She opened to a blank page and began to write. Not names this time, she didn't know these names, but numbers. 17, the number from 3 days ago. Beside it she wrote 6 saved, 2 lost. Then she closed the journal and held it against her chest, feeling the weight of all those pages, all those deaths, all those choices. Sleep didn't come easy that night. It never did. But somewhere around 0300, as the base settled into the quiet hours before dawn, Sarah finally drifted off. She dreamed of a hillside, of a scope, of a trigger she'd pulled 43 times to protect men who thought she'd abandoned them. Tomorrow they'd know the truth. Tomorrow Ghost 7 would step out of the shadows. Tomorrow everything would change. But tonight in the darkness she was still just Sarah Mitchell, combat medic, quiet woman, someone nobody noticed, someone invisible. Sometimes invisibility is a choice. Sometimes it's survival. And sometimes it's the only way to do what needs to be done without the weight of recognition, making it impossible to pull the trigger. What does truth cost when it's been buried under classification and silence? Sarah stood outside the operations tent at 0650, 10 minutes before the briefing that would change everything. Her hands were steady. Her uniform was pressed. Her hair was pulled back in the same tight bun she always wore. But inside, she felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, waiting to jump. Through the tent flap she could hear voices. Marcus, loud and angry as always. Hayes, calm and analytical. Brooks, dripping with sarcasm. The whole team was there, gathered for what they thought would be a routine briefing about Ghost 7's court-martial proceedings. They had no idea the person they wanted court-martialed was about to walk through that door. Colonel Winters appeared beside her. Ready? She wanted to say no, wanted to run, wanted to stay in the shadows where she'd been safe for so long, but Jensen's words echoed in her mind. They deserved to know, and she deserved to stop hiding. As ready as I'll ever be, sir. They entered together. The conversation died instantly. 8 pairs of eyes turned toward them, confused. What was the medic doing at a classified briefing about Ghost 7? Marcus frowned. Sir, this is a closed briefing. The medic shouldn't. Chief Petty Officer Sarah Mitchell, Winters interrupted, his voice carrying the weight of command, is exactly who should be here, because she's the subject of this briefing. The silence was deafening. Sarah could see their minds working, trying to make sense of his words. Chief Petty Officer. The medic was enlisted, not a chief. Unless. Marcus's eyes widened. No. Gentlemen, Winters said, moving to the head of the table where a laptop waited, what I'm about to show you is classified top secret. You will not discuss it outside this tent. You will not record it. You will not share it. Are we clear? A chorus of yes, sir, echoed through the tent. Winters opened the laptop and pulled up a video file. This is gun camera footage from Ghost 7's position during the Khaled operation. It's been declassified for this briefing only. He pressed play. The screen showed a scope's-eye view of the village below. The timestamp read 05:30:00. They watched as the team breached the compound, watched as the ambush erupted, watched as chaos consumed the mission. Then the scope shifted, away from the compound, to a position 400 meters beyond it. Sarah heard Marcus inhale sharply. On the screen they could see what Ghost 7 had seen. A squad of professional fighters setting up a machine gun nest, others preparing RPGs, a coordinated team moving to create a kill box around the extraction point. Jesus, Hayes whispered. We never saw them. The scope centered on the lead fighter. A crosshair settled on his chest. The timestamp clicked to 05:31:15. Then the view jerked slightly, the recoil of a fired round, and the fighter dropped. The scope moved to the next target, another shot, another fighter down, again. For 3 minutes they watched Ghost 7 methodically eliminate the threat that would have killed them all. Viking Actual Ghost 7, I have eyes on your position. Stand by. Sarah's voice came through the speakers, calm and professional. On the screen, the scope never stopped moving, never stopped finding targets, never stopped firing. Ghost 7, where's our fire support? We're taking casualties here. Marcus's voice now strained and desperate. On the screen, the scope shifted to another target, a man with an RPG lining up a shot at the team's position. The crosshair settled. The shot fired. The man dropped. She was giving us fire support, Jensen said quietly. Just not where we were looking. The video continued. They watched Ghost 7 cover their extraction, dropping 3 more fighters who tried to pursue. They watched the scope track the helicopter as it lifted off, staying locked on until it was out of range. Then the video ended. Winters closed the laptop. Ghost 7 fired 43 rounds during that operation. 17 confirmed kills. 0 friendly fire incidents. 0 missed shots. He looked at Marcus. The 2 men you lost died in the initial breach, before Ghost 7 could engage. The other 6 survived because someone made the tactical decision to focus on the threat you couldn't see instead of the threat you could. Marcus sat down heavily, his face pale. I don't understand. Why didn't she tell us what she was doing? Because, Sarah said, speaking for the first time, her voice quiet but steady, if I'd told you about the secondary ambush, you would have adjusted your tactics. You would have moved toward that threat, and that would have exposed you to more fire from the fighters in the compound. The best way to keep you alive was to let you focus on the immediate threat while I dealt with the real danger. All eyes turned to her. She could see them processing, reconciling the quiet medic they knew with the voice on that video, with the person who'd killed 17 men to save them. Brooks spoke first, his usual sarcasm gone. You're Ghost 7. You've been here the whole time. Yes. Why? Marcus's voice was barely above a whisper. Why work as a medic? Why hide? Sarah took a breath. This was the hard part, the part where she had to explain herself. I've been Ghost 7 for 4 years, 23 missions, 90 confirmed kills. After the last operation, I asked for reassignment. The weight was too much. The nightmares, the faces, I couldn't do it anymore. She paused, choosing her words carefully. Command offered me option 3, Maintain my clearance and availability for critical operations but work as a medic in between. Save lives instead of taking them. Try to find some kind of balance. Balance, Hayes repeated, between killing and healing. Yes, Sarah met his eyes. I'm still Ghost 7 when I'm needed, but most days I'm just trying to be someone who helps people instead of hurting them. The tent fell silent. Sarah could feel their eyes on her, judging, weighing, trying to understand. Finally, Marcus stood. He walked toward her and Sarah braced herself for anger, for accusation, for rejection. Instead, he held out his hand. I owe you an apology. I owe you my life. And I owe you thanks for keeping my brothers alive when I couldn't see the danger coming. Sarah stared at his hand for a moment, then took it. His grip was firm, genuine. You don't owe me anything. I was doing my job. No, Marcus said. You were doing what most people can't, making impossible choices under impossible pressure. And then you had to listen to us trash talk you for 3 days without being able to defend yourself. He turned to the team. We all owe her an apology. One by one they stood. Hayes, Brooks, Jensen, all of them. And one by one they shook her hand, said thank you, said sorry. Brooks, who'd called her weak, looked at her with something like awe. I'm sorry for every shitty thing I said about you. You're more of a warrior than I'll ever be. I'm not, Sarah said quietly. I'm just someone who learned how to shoot. No, Hayes shook his head. You're someone who learned how to make the hard calls. That's different. That's harder. After they left, Sarah stood alone with Colonel Winters. She felt drained, wrung out, like she'd just completed a mission more exhausting than any firefight. How do you feel? Winters asked. Lighter, Sarah admitted. Like I've been carrying something heavy and someone finally helped me put it down. That's because you have been carrying it, alone, in silence. He handed her a folder. JSOC reviewed Marcus's complaint. Case closed, no court-martial, no investigation, you're cleared. Sarah took the folder, but her eyes were on the empty tent, on the chairs where the team had sat, on the table where she'd been silently judged for 3 days. Sir, what happens now? Now, Winters smiled slightly. Now you keep being their medic, keep patching them up, keep saving lives. He paused. And when Ghost 7 is needed, you do what you do best. Keep them alive from 2 kilometers out where they can't see you. Even after this, after they know. Especially after this. Winters headed for the exit, then stopped. You know what the difference is between a secret and a shared burden? Sarah shook her head. A secret isolates you. A shared burden connects you. He left her with those words. That evening, Sarah found herself in the wrecked tent for the first time since arriving at Fob Python. She'd always avoided it, afraid that too much time around the team would reveal something she couldn't hide. But now they knew, and somehow that made it easier to breathe. Marcus waved her over to their table. Mitchell, come here. She approached cautiously. Old habits. Sit, he said, pushing out a chair. We want to hear about it if you're willing to talk. Sarah sat. Around the table were Hayes, Brooks, Jensen, and 3 others from the team, all of them looking at her with new eyes. What do you want to know? Everything, Hayes said. How does someone who looks like a high school teacher become the most lethal sniper in JSOC? Sarah smiled just a little. Long story. We've got time, Marcus said. So she told them. Not everything. Some things would always stay locked inside, but enough. About her first deployment. About discovering she had a gift for reading wind and distance. About the instructors who'd recognized something in her that she hadn't seen in herself. About the long, quiet hours behind a scope where the world narrowed to breath and heartbeat and the space between trigger pulls. What's it like, Brooks asked, making that shot, taking that life? Sarah was quiet for a moment. It's like turning off a light. 1 second someone exists, the next they don't, and you're the reason. You're the moment between their past and their non-existent future. That's heavy, Jensen said. It is every time. Sarah looked at her hands, the hands that had killed 90 people, the hands that had saved countless more. But you know what's heavier? Watching good people die because you didn't take the shot. That's the weight I can't carry. Marcus nodded slowly. Is that why you asked for the medic assignment, to balance the scales? Something like that. I thought if I could save enough people, maybe the math would work out. Maybe I could sleep without seeing faces. She paused. It doesn't work that way, though. The faces don't go away just because you save other people. No, Hayes agreed quietly. They don't. I've got my own collection. Around the table, heads nodded. They all had their faces, their ghosts, their choices that haunted the dark hours before dawn. Sarah realized something in that moment. She wasn't alone. She'd never been alone. These men, these warriors who judged her and dismissed her, they carried the same weight. They understood the same burden. "Thank you," she said softly, "for letting me tell you, for understanding." "Thank you," Marcus replied, "for keeping us alive when we were too stupid to see the danger." They talked late into the night, sharing stories and scars and the kind of honesty that only comes when people who have survived hell together finally start trusting each other. For the first time in years, Sarah felt like she belonged somewhere. Not as Ghost 7, not as Chief Mitchell, just as Sarah, a warrior among warriors, a human among humans. Can redemption exist in the same hands that pull triggers? 2 weeks after the briefing, Sarah stood on a training range with Marcus's team, teaching them long-range shooting techniques. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The medic they'd thought was afraid of gunfire was now showing them how to compensate for wind drift at 1,000 meters. "You're overcompensating," Sarah said, watching Hayes through his scope. "Trust your first instinct. Your body knows what to do." Hayes adjusted, breathed out slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The target pinged at 800 meters. Better, again. Marcus stood beside her, watching his team work. "You're good at this. Teaching, I mean." "I like it," Sarah admitted. "Helping people get better at something, knowing they'll be safer because of what I teach them. That's the medic in you talking." Maybe, or maybe it's just who I am now, someone trying to do more good than harm. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Jensen told me he saw you, coming down from that hillside after the extraction." Sarah's hands tightened on her range finder. "He told you?" "After the briefing. Said he'd been keeping your secret because he knew you must have had a good reason for the silence." Marcus looked at her. "He was right. You did." "I always do," Sarah said. "The silence, I mean. It's not about hiding. It's about giving people space to process the violence without having to reconcile it with the person they see every day." That's very philosophical for someone who kills people for a living. "I don't kill people for a living anymore," Sarah corrected gently. "I save them. Ghost 7 is just something I do when there's no other choice." Hayes finished his round and walked over. "Chief, I've been thinking about what you said, about carrying faces, about not being able to balance the scales." "Yeah, I think you're wrong." He met her eyes. "I think the scales balance different than you expect. It's not about saving X number of people to make up for killing Y number. It's about choosing, in each moment, who you want to be. And every day you choose to be someone who saves lives is a day the scales tip toward light instead of dark." Sarah felt something in her chest loosen. "That's actually really profound, Hayes." "I have my moments," he grinned. "But seriously, you saved us. You're teaching us. You're choosing to be someone who builds instead of destroys. That matters." Over the next few weeks, something shifted at Fob Python. Sarah stopped eating alone, stopped working in isolated silence. The team started coming to her not just for medical care, but for conversation, for advice, for the kind of quiet wisdom that comes from someone who's seen the worst of humanity and still chooses to believe in the best. Brooks, who'd been the harshest in his judgment, sought her out one evening. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Why didn't you defend yourself? When we were tearing you apart in that tent, you could have said something, hinted, given us a clue." Sarah thought about it. "Because Ghost 7's effectiveness depends on anonymity. The moment I defend myself, I reveal myself. And revealing myself puts everyone at risk. It's better to be underestimated and effective than recognized and compromised." "That's a lonely way to live." "It is," Sarah agreed. But it's the price of doing what I do. Some jobs require shadows. Some victories need to stay silent. Brooks nodded slowly. Well, for what it's worth, I see you now, the real you, and I'm sorry I didn't see you before. You saw what I wanted you to see, Sarah said. That's not your fault. But it was more than just the team that changed. Sarah felt something shifting inside herself too. The weight she'd been carrying, those 90 faces, those 17 kills from Kalat felt different now. Still heavy but shared. The team knew her secret, and instead of rejecting her, they'd accepted her. All of her. The healer and the killer. The medic and the sniper. The quiet woman and the ghost. One night, lying in her bunk, Sarah pulled out her journal. She opened to a blank page and wrote something she'd never written before. I am not my kills. I am not my saves. I am the space between them, the moment of choice. The decision to pull the trigger or hold fire, to fight or heal, to speak or stay silent. And in that space, I am enough. She closed the journal and lay back, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in months, sleep came easy. No faces. No nightmares, just darkness and quiet and the sound of her own breathing, just peace. The next morning, Colonel Winters called her to his office again. We have a situation, he said without preamble. American hostages, 3 aid workers in Kabul. Intelligence suggests they'll be executed in 72 hours unless we extract them. Sarah's heart rate increased. What do you need from me? Ghost 7, one more mission. High risk, high precision. The hostages are in an urban compound with heavy civilian presence. We need surgical strikes, eliminate threats without collateral damage. He slid a folder across the desk. It's voluntary. You've earned the right to say no. Sarah opened the folder. 3 faces smiled up at her. A doctor, a teacher, a nurse. All of them civilians who'd gone to Afghanistan to help people. All of them about to die because they'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She thought about her journal, about those 90 names, about choosing who she wanted to be in each moment. I'm in, she said. When do we move? Tomorrow night. Marcus's team will handle the ground assault. You'll provide overwatch. Winters paused. They've requested you specifically, said they trust Ghost 7 more than any other asset. Sarah felt something warm spread through her chest. Trust. After everything, they trusted her. I won't let them down. You never do, Winters said. That's why you're Ghost 7. The next 36 hours were a blur of mission planning and equipment checks. Sarah worked alongside the team, no longer hiding behind the medic persona. They treated her as one of them, a warrior preparing for battle. Hayes helped her calibrate her scope. Brooks assisted with range cards. Marcus reviewed fire support procedures with her, making sure everyone understood how Ghost 7 would operate. Same as last time, Sarah said during the briefing. I engage threats you can't see. If you don't hear from me, it's because I'm busy keeping you alive. Trust the process. We do, Marcus said simply. We trust you. The mission launched at 2200 hours local time. Sarah was positioned on a rooftop 800 meters from the target compound. Her Barrett was set up, her spotting scope calibrated, her breathing steady. Through her scope, she could see the compound. The hostages were visible in a second-floor window, bound and guarded. 8 fighters patrolled the grounds. More were inside. Ghost 7 Viking Actual, in position and ready for breach. Marcus's voice in her ear, calm and professional. Viking Actual Ghost 7. I have eyes on 8 hostiles exterior. 12 more estimated interior. 3 friendlies visible, second floor northwest window. Advise extreme caution on breach. Hostiles are positioned to execute hostages at first sign of assault. Copy that. Can you neutralize exterior threats before breach? Sarah calculated angles, timing, wind. Affirmative. Stand by for sequence fire. On my mark, you'll have 10 seconds to reach the compound before interior hostiles react. Standing by. Sarah's world narrowed to her scope. 8 targets, 10 seconds. She'd need 2 seconds per shot maximum. No room for error, no time for doubt. just training and instinct and the cold certainty of purpose. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow, found that quiet place inside where emotion died and only skill existed. "Mark," she whispered. The Barrett spoke, once, twice, 8 times in 16 seconds, 8 targets dropped like puppets with cut strings. Exterior clear, move now. She watched through her scope as Marcus's team rushed the compound. They moved like a well-oiled machine, covering angles, clearing corners. The breach was textbook perfect, but then gunfire erupted from inside. Sarah shifted her scope to the windows, searching for threats. There, third floor, a fighter with an AK-47 moving toward the hostage room. She fired. The fighter dropped. Another appeared. She fired again. Ghost 7 taking heavy fire, second floor. Need suppression on southern windows. Sarah's scope swept to the southern side. 3 fighters firing down at the team. She took them in sequence. 1, 2, 3. Each shot placed with the precision of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in training and 90 times for real. Southern threats eliminated. Continue your push. The firefight lasted 7 minutes. To Sarah, watching through her scope and making shot after careful shot, it felt like hours. Every trigger pull was a calculation. Every kill was a choice. Every decision carried the weight of 3 innocent lives and 6 warriors trusting her to keep them alive. When Marcus's voice finally came through her radio, hostages secure, all friendlies accounted for, compound clear, Sarah let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "Copy that, Viking Actual. Nice work. Ghost 7 is going cold and moving to extract." She broke down her hide with practiced efficiency, packed her gear, and made her way to the extraction point. 20 minutes later, she was on a helicopter with the team and the 3 hostages, flying back to base through the Afghan night. The doctor, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, looked at Sarah. "You saved us. They said there was an angel watching over the operation." Sarah smiled slightly. "Not an angel, just someone who knows how to shoot." "Well," the woman said, tears streaming down her face, "you're our angel, thank you. Thank you for giving us our lives back." Marcus caught Sarah's eye across the helicopter. He nodded once, a gesture of respect, of recognition, of understanding. They'd done it together, ground and overwatch. Warriors trusting each other with their lives, the way it was supposed to work. Back at base, after debriefing and gear check and all the administrative aftermath of a successful mission, Sarah finally made it back to her quarters. She sat on her bunk and pulled out her journal, opened to a blank page. And for the first time in 4 years, she didn't write about kills. She wrote about saves. 3 hostages rescued, 6 teammates protected, 1 mission complete. And beneath that she wrote, "Maybe the scales don't need to balance. Maybe the point isn't to erase the darkness with light. Maybe the point is just to keep choosing the light, mission after mission, day after day, until the darkness doesn't define you anymore." She closed the journal and lay back, listening to the night sounds of the base. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear laughter from the wrecked tent. Marcus and his team, probably, celebrating another successful operation. She thought about joining them, about being part of that community in a way she'd never allowed herself before. But tomorrow, tonight, she needed the quiet, needed to sit with what she'd done and who she was becoming, needed to acknowledge that she was both Ghost 7 and Sarah Mitchell, the sniper and the medic, the killer and the healer, and that somehow, impossibly, those identities weren't contradictions. They were complements. 2 sides of the same person trying to do the most good in a world full of hard choices. Sleep came easily that night, and for once the faces in her dreams weren't accusing. They were just faces, people she'd encountered, lives she'd touched for better or worse. Part of her story, but not the whole story, not anymore. Because the whole story was still being written, one choice at a time, one mission at a time, one moment at a time when she decided who she wanted to be. And tonight, she wanted to be someone who saved 3 innocent people from execution, someone her team trusted, Someone who carried the weight of violence but wasn't crushed by it. Someone who understood that sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. Ghost 7 had work to do. Sarah Mitchell had lives to save. And somehow, impossibly, they were the same person doing the same thing in different ways. That was enough. It had to be enough. And for the first time in years, Sarah believed it really was.